Hello everyone, and welcome back to Personality Solutions, where we help you find your function. And that's in both sense of the word. If you're curious about your function in this world, then check out the description below where I have a link that you can check out to find your function. Today I will be going into the very basics of the Myers-Briggs, or MBTI. The MBTI forms the base part of one of the most powerful theories of personality that exists today. I will be building all that out in this video series, so sit back, relax, enjoy. So if you've watched my previous video on the cognitive functions, you have a good basic idea of what they are. This video will go into more detail about the cognitive functions, specifically how to stack them. That's called your function stack, and every personality has a base function stack. Function stack just means 4 cognitive functions stacked from what you use the most to what you use the least. I'll get into what that means in a moment here. First, I will introduce the 8 cognitive functions. I'll go through each of them and just briefly state what their function is. Okay, so first we have the extroverted perceiving functions. Extroverted intuition and extroverted sensing. NE and SE. NE, or extroverted intuition, deals with novel idea generation and brainstorming. It expands out from one to many, so it's the opposite of narrowing down. It deals with the conceptual world, so ideas. And it's a creative function that leads to looking at many different possibilities in the external world. The types that have this first, or as their primary cognitive function, are ENFPs and ENTPs. INTPs and INFPs have this cognitive function second. Okay, next we have SE, or extroverted sensing. This function takes in information from the sensory world using the 5 senses. It looks at concrete facts in the present moment, the here and now. Types that have this function as their primary cognitive function are ESFPs and ESTPs. Types that have this second are ISTPs and ISFPs. So these 2 functions are perceiving functions, functions that take in information from the external world. So you're perceiving the external world and you're taking in information when you're using these 2 functions. They're gathering functions. As such, the types that have these functions in their first and second slot are gathering focused types, especially the types that have this first. So the EP types, ESFP, ESTP, ENTP, ENFP. These types gather information, whether it's through the 5 sensory or through the conceptual world of ideas. Okay, next we have the introverted perceiving functions, NI and SI, or introverted intuition and introverted sensing. So introverted intuition, or NI, connects existing ideas together. This goes the other way from extroverted intuition. It goes from many to one. So it's a narrowing down function. It's an organizing function, organizing ideas in the conceptual world. So this type narrows down many ideas to form conclusions. It's very future focused and big picture analysis focused. It uses pieces of ideas to build a sort of conceptual map in the brain or in the mind. Then we have introverted sensing, or SI. As you may have guessed, this does the same thing except with the sensory. So it organizes sensory details. This function studies flashbacks and tried and true methods that have worked or have not worked in the past and evaluates that with the present. It's a detail-oriented and traditional function. It looks at the past essentially to make sure that mistakes aren't repeated, and to understand how the present works, it looks at those past experiences. The types that have introverted intuition, or NI, first as their primary cognitive function are INFJs and INTJs. The types that have this second are ENTJs and ENFJs. The types that have introverted sensing as their first primary cognitive function are ISTJs and INFJs. The types that have this function second are ESFJs and ESTJs. As you may have gathered, extroverted perceiving functions are focused on bringing in and gathering information from the external world, and then the introverted perceiving functions are then focused on taking that information and organizing it in the internal world. This is what I also mentioned in my previous video. If you haven't watched that yet, take a look at that. I will link that in one of these top corners here in this video. Types that have an extroverted function first are considered extroverts, and the types that have an introverted cognitive function first are considered introverts. But in reality, it's these functions that have these extroverted and introverted properties. So the function you're using at the time, in the moment, is what creates that. If you're using an introverted function in the moment, you're in your internal world, so you're going to be more introverted. And if you're using an extroverted function in that moment, you're more in the external world, so you're going to be more extroverted. This is what I mean by it's kind of debatable whether you being an introverted person is a thing or not. You might be introverted in specific settings and extroverted in other settings, depending on what cognitive function you're using. So that's what's according to this theory. All right, we're half done. So we just have decision-making functions to go. We just did the perceiving functions. Now we're on to the decision-making functions or judging functions. But I prefer to say decision-making functions because that is more aligned with what these functions actually do. They help you make decisions. While the previous perceiving functions we looked at are how you gather information and organize it, these next few decision-making functions tell you how you make decisions. What is your preferred way to make decisions? So let's start with the extroverted decision-making functions. Extroverted thinking, or TE, and extroverted feeling, or FE. So extroverted thinking, or TE, looks at what objectively works in the external world. What are the results? What are the outcomes? It very outwardly and directly conveys logical analysis. This function externalizes logic and makes decisions based on what logically works for people in the external world. Types that have this cognitive function as their primary cognitive function are ENTJs and ESTJs. Types that have this function second in their stack are INTJs and ISTJs. All right, moving on to extroverted feeling, or FE. This function looks at the values of the collective to make decisions. In other words, it makes decisions based on what brings value to others in the external world. This function is where empathy comes from. In addition to empathy, though, this function also upholds emotional harmony within a collective. It can also generate emotion in order to uphold this kind of harmony within that collective. Types that have this function as their primary cognitive function are ESFJs and ENFJs. Types that have the second are ISFJs and INFJs. So these two were the extroverted decision-making functions. Types that have this function first are more tribe-focused. They're focused on what logically works for other people or the values of the collective, so what other people are collectively valuing. And they will make decisions based on those things. All right, now we're moving to the introverted decision-making functions. Introverted feeling, or FI, and introverted thinking, or TI. Introverted thinking, or TI, is focused on how things work. It internalizes a personal logic and makes decisions based on an internal logical framework that they possess. This function seeks consistency of ideas internally. So what works for me, basically, and why? Types that have this cognitive function as their primary cognitive function are INTPs and ISTPs. Types that have this function second are ENTPs and ESTPs. Last but not least, we have introverted feeling, or FI, where FE, or extroverted feeling, is where empathy comes from. FI, or introverted feeling, is where sympathy comes from. This function makes decisions based on an internal value system, what is subjectively valued. It upholds harmony of actions and thought with personal values, and seeks authenticity and individualism of the self. Types that have this as their primary cognitive function are INFP and ISFP. Types that have this second are ESFP and ENFP. So these introverted decision-making functions, types that have this first are self-focused types. They start with themselves and their internal logical framework or value system when making decisions.